All right, welcome everyone. It looks like everybody is filtering in. Some are still connecting to audio. Everybody is muted so we can keep the recording nice and clean. For those who registered for tonight who could not make it tonight, we have a recording, and for all of you who could make it tonight, we have a recording. So if you missed something along the way, we will be sending you a recording so you can come back and grab it. So my name is David Feeks. I am by default the host tonight, and that is fine. I am the owner and founder of the Parents Estate Planning Law Firm in Acton. We are estate planners focused primarily on clients with young children and empty nester clients. And just out of curiosity, so I can know this, it might be helpful for Mike to know this as well. By the way, Mike Guthrie, it will also be presenting tonight. Mike is from Northwestern Mutual Life, and I will be talking about the legal side of gaining control in a time of uncertainty. And Mike will be talking more about the financial side of gaining control in a time of uncertainty. A couple of ground rules for tonight. Mike and I will be happy to take questions at the end because I'm going to take my 20 minutes first. Mike's going to take his 20 minutes second. If you have questions for either of us, feel free to drop those into the chat. So just drop a chat question in there. And if you do that, if you can start the chat question with either a D, if it's a question for me, my name is David, or an M, if it's a question for Mike, that'll help us when we go back to kind of decipher which questions are for me about legal estate planning and which questions are for Mike about financial planning. So that'll be great. But if a question occurs to you as we're going along, don't feel like you have to hold on to it. Just drop it into the chat and we'll scroll back up at the bottom and catch those questions so that we get them answered before we finish up for tonight. So for me, I just want to thank you for spending some time with us tonight. I know that sometimes it's hard to get on Zooms. I know that we're all on a lot of Zooms, and after a year and a half of Zooming here and there and everywhere, especially at work, for a lot of us, Zoom can get tiring at 8 o'clock at night. So I appreciate that you took some time to join us, and we're going to try to, we're not going to try, we're going to make this time as useful for you and as beneficial for you as we possibly can. Thank you for joining us, because again, I know it's hard to do that. I want to find out from you all, and if you can just drop in the chat either a yes or a no, a Y or an N, simple. Do you have children under the age of 18? Just give me a quick Y for yes, or give me a quick N for no. Do you have children under the age of 18? And that's going to help me. Thanks, Joanna. That's going to help me to understand a little bit about who you are and how I'm going to structure my 20 minutes. But because, great. Awesome. All right. So for those of you who have children under the age of 18, I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about probably what's most important to you about legal planning for your family, and that's making sure your kids are very well protected if something happens to you. So I don't want to leave that out if you've got those minor kids. So we're going to talk about what happens to your kids if something happens to you. We're going to talk about what happens to your assets from a legal standpoint if something happens to you. We're going to talk about incapacity. What happens if you become incapacitated and you need someone to step in and make legal or financial or healthcare decisions for you? And if anybody has an adult child or knows someone who has an adult child, when we talk about incapacity, we can also talk a little bit about the kinds of planning and the kinds of documents that even young adult people should have in place. We would say any child who's at least 18 years of age or older should have some level of estate planning documents in place. But that's what I want to talk about with you guys for my 20 minutes. What happens to your kids what happens to your assets if something happens to you or something happens to you and your spouse if you're married, and what happens if you become incapacitated. So again, my name is David Feeks. I'm the owner and founder of the Parents Estate Planning Law Firm in Acton. Estate planning is what we do all day, every day, day in and day out. So I've got a lot of experience with families with young kids and empty nesters. And here's why. Because although I am an empty nester now, and I've got a 24-year-old and a 21-year-old, once upon a time, I had a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old. And the planning I had to figure out for my own family to protect my own kids was where I started. Because there was a point in time when my wife and I realized that the plan we had for our own kids was deficient in a number of ways. We realized that while we were out to dinner and a movie on a Saturday night, while our kids were home with our teenage babysitter, who was our usual Saturday night babysitter and was also our babysitter because we had a standing date night every other Thursday night. So one night when we were coming home, my wife and I were talking about literally what would happen if we got into a car accident and a police officer showed up on our front doorstep. And what we realized is that our babysitter wouldn't know exactly what to do. Our babysitter did not know that my sister-in-law, my brother-in-law, my sister and my brother-in-law, excuse me, were our long-term guardians. My babysitter wouldn't know who to call. And even if my babysitter knew all of that, it would take my sister, my brother-in-law, 2.5 hours to drive up from Connecticut. So what was going to happen in those 2.5 hours? And I realized that my kids were at risk from being removed from my home if a police officer showed up and my long-term guardians were not immediately available. So when we talk about guardianship, when we talk about who takes care of your kids if something happens to you, you really want to be thinking about this in two distinct timeframes. The first is who's going to take care of our kids or my kids if something happens to me or to us. If I was to die, if you're married, if we were both to die, who would we want to step in and care for and raise our kids until they're all 18? And the most important thing that you need to know is that unless you have a plan, unless you've created a plan, the plan is going to be created for you by somebody else. It's going to be created for you by somebody you don't know, who doesn't know your children and doesn't know what's most important to you and for you. A probate court judge is going to make this decision, and they're going to be going off limited data. They're going to be going off whatever someone standing in front of them is telling them and whatever they're submitting to the court. So a probate court judge can't possibly know who you would choose, who you would never choose, because some of you may have people in your immediate families that you know you don't want to be the guardians of your kids, that you're afraid may end up standing in front of that probate court judge asking to become the guardians of your kids. So a judge can't know who you would choose, can't know who you would never choose. So they do the best they can. They're always looking out for the best interests of your kids, but they just can't know who the right person is the way you know who the right person is. You are the parents of your kids. You know who's the best. You know who can best stand in your shoes. And again, without a plan, a judge has to decide this on very limited data. So it's critically important that if you are the parent of a young child, if you're about to be the parent of a young child, that you start to think about who you want to step in and serve as a long-term guardian for your children if for any reason you're not there to care for and love and raise them yourself. And as you think about guardianship, whether it's family members or whether it's friends, I want you to think in two distinct timeframes. Long-term, what happens if you die? Who do you want to nominate to stand in your shoes as a parent? And also short-term, which is where I started with, if your long-term guardian would not be immediately available to your kids. In other words, if they don't live next door or down the street or across town, then equally important is identifying people who live close to where you live, who can step in and take care of your kids until your long-term guardian can arrive and take over. In our office, that's what we call short-term guardians, or what we refer to as first responders. And here, how you think about that is to think about people you know and trust who live within a 15 or 20-minute radius around your house. Think about your neighbors and your friends and maybe family members who live close by. Again, people you know and trust, people your kids know and trust, someone who can come to your house quickly and be with your kids until your long-term guardian can arrive and take over their care. Now, when my wife and I were working out the planning for our kids back when they were still little, daycare age, that's what we did. We thought about the people who lived close to where we lived, and we realized we have a neighbor 4 houses away who our kids are best friends with, and we love the parents, and our kids have grown up together. So there would be no one better suited to run up the street and take care of my kids or take my kids to their house than my neighbors down the street. And we realized we've got lots of friends in town who our kids know and trust. And we have one of my nieces is 15 minutes away, who happens to be a direct conduit to my sister and my brother-in-law in Connecticut. And so we came up with this list of short-term guardians. And then we let our babysitter know, okay, in an emergency, if you can't reach us, if we don't come home when we're supposed to, you need to start calling the people on this list because they have the legal authority to come over and be with the kids on a short-term basis. And that's how I figured out how to make sure that my kids would never be taken into the custody of strangers under any circumstances, no matter what. And that's the assurance we've given every one of our clients. And it's the assurance every one of you can have as well. If you are now a little bit concerned about, oh my, what happens, if we go out on a date night and the kids are home with a babysitter, or if they're at daycare, or if they're at school and something happens to us. So those are the 2 timeframes you want to be thinking about in terms of guardianship. Long-term, who do you want to step in and take care of your kids if something happens to you until they become legal adults themselves, which is when they turn 18? And the short-term, who can bridge that gap between the moment of something has happened to you and the time when your long-term guardians can arrive and take over? Because for some people, that might be a half an hour. For some people, it's a few hours. For some people, it's a few days. I have some clients for whom it may be weeks, months, because their long-term guardians live outside of the country. And certainly over the last 18 months, if we've learned anything, it's that we don't automatically get to travel from one country to another, even in emergency circumstances. So I want to start there, how to create a really good plan for your minor children. And that's making sure that there are long-term and short-term guardians in place for them. So next, I want to shift and just talk a little bit about what happens to your assets. And here again, if you were to die, what happens to your assets is a function of whose plan is going to get followed. And what I mean by that is if you create your own plan, your plan is going to get followed. If you don't create your own plan, someone else's plan for you is going to get followed. And that other plan is the default plan that the Commonwealth of Massachusetts very kindly provides to you, but doesn't work well for most families. If you die without a good plan in place, everything that you own could end up in a court process, being supervised by a probate court judge who's going to decide ultimately where all your assets go. Now, they're following a set of rules about where your assets go, but you don't have any control about where your assets go unless you create a plan that says, here's where I want my assets to go. But even more important than that is what can happen in that court process. The court process is called probate. And again, if you die owning assets in your own name, your assets are going to go through probate. If you're single and you die, this is where your assets go. If you're married and you both die, this is pretty much where all your assets go. The court process has drawbacks, the first of which is it takes a long time. It takes at least a year to probate an estate in Massachusetts. Never faster. That's the creditor claims period. That's how long creditors get to make claims against your assets. So it's at least a year. So it's long. It could be expensive. There are filing fees, publishing fees, accounting and appraisal fees, a whole host of fees that usually add up to be tens of thousands of dollars in most cases. And that's money that's going out the back door that can't be used to benefit your kids or for your family in any material way in the future. It's just lost to people you don't know that are doing things that aren't particularly important to you. So it's long, it's expensive, it's cumbersome for your family. Probate is cumbersome in the sense that your family won't get immediate access to your assets while they're going through probate. And if your family needs access to that money to take care of your kids, healthcare, education, food, clothing, shelter, transportation, reasonable vacations, they would need to get permission from the probate court first, and that can take weeks or months, depending upon where in the process things stand. When your kids are young, someone has to be appointed to manage the assets for them, because obviously minor children cannot receive and manage their own assets. They can't inherit directly from someone else until they're at least age 18. So the court has to appoint someone to manage those assets for them. And for most people, that would be a stranger to your family. It's going to be somebody simply appointed by the court from a list they keep of people they know who have experience managing money, who are bonded. And so very often, if not always, there is a stranger who's now managing the money for the benefit of your kids, and your guardians have to deal with a stranger on a day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month basis. With no formal plan in place, here's what's going to happen. When your kids turn 18, they're going to be entitled to receive the money that you've left to them. That's whether or not you think 18 is an appropriate age, or whether they would be financially mature enough to make wise decisions about that money. It just happens at age 18. And then finally, the last thing about probate and that court process is it's public. Everything that gets filed with the probate court becomes a public document. It's available for inspection by anybody who wanders into the probate court, which is open usually from 8:30 in the morning till 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Monday through Friday. Anybody can walk in, pull out all your probate documents, sit down, read through them, make copies of them, and walk out the door with those copies in their hand. And for better or for worse, there are people who spend time in probate court looking to see when an 18-year-old is about to inherit a substantial amount of assets. Now, if that process does not sound appealing for you, your kids, your family, here's the good news. There's a way to avoid it. Probate is totally avoidable from an asset perspective, but again, you have to plan for this. It does not happen automatically. The way to avoid it is by creating what we call a revocable living trust. And very simply, it's a trust that you create. And if you're married, you and your spouse can create this, and often will create this together as a joint trust. So it's a trust that you create, that you manage while you're living, and that you are the beneficiary of as long as you're living. And the idea is you create this trust and retitle your existing assets in the name of the trust. Things like your real estate and your bank accounts and your taxable investment accounts. And as to things like life insurance and retirement, you would change the beneficiary designation. So instead of going to your minor children, if something happens to one or to both of you and your spouse, it would go to your trust and would be managed for their benefit until they're old enough to receive those assets. So a revocable living trust is the way you avoid probate. And while you're still living, you still have complete control over everything. So a revocable trust can help you stay out of the probate process. It can help you to save on estate taxes. And we don't really have enough time here tonight to get deeply into estate taxes. The important thing to know is that Massachusetts does have an estate tax, and it kicks in at $1 million. And it's not very hard to get over that $1 million threshold because your life insurance counts towards that $1 million. So a trust can help you stay out of probate. It can help you to save on estate taxes. And the third great thing it can do is it can be set up in such a way so that the money you leave to your kids can be protected, so that when they do become adults, and I'm discovering this as the parent of adult children now, if they run into creditor problems, if they get sued, if they get married and divorced, the money you leave to your kids can be protected, so it can't be taken away by anybody else in their lives. Can't be taken away by a creditor or anybody who sues them or a future divorcing spouse. So it's a really, really powerful tool. And what I've discovered over many years of doing this is about 95% of our clients will opt into a trust-based plan because they know once they understand what's going to happen, they know they want to make things as easy as possible for their family. And so keeping their family out of that probate court process is important. And very often saving on estate taxes is important. And protecting that money that they're leaving to their future adult children is equally important. So that's around what happens to your assets. And lastly, I just want to talk about what happens if you become incapacitated. And again, planning is critically important here. I hear a lot from married couples. This isn't really important because I know that if something happens to me, my spouse is going to be able to step right in and do things for me. And the reality is, I'm here to tell you, the reality is that if you are incapacitated, your spouse does not automatically get to step in and make decisions for you. They don't get to make legal decisions. They don't get to make financial decisions. They will not automatically be able to access the bank account that is only in your name. They will not be able to sign legal documents on your behalf, and they will not automatically be able to make medical decisions for you. And they certainly won't be able to access medical records about you, because most of you have probably run into HIPAA at some time or another. If you've ever had blood work done, if you've ever gotten an x-ray, you have run into HIPAA, even if you didn't realize it, because every time you sign the electronic PIN pad, when you're registering, that you're giving authorization for the medical provider to release information about you to either your insurance company to pay the bill or to the doctor that has ordered that series of tests. And the federal medical privacy law just prevents a medical provider from releasing confidential information about you to anyone else without your written consent, and that includes your spouse. So given that your spouse does not automatically get to step in and make decisions for you, and by extension, that means no one else gets to step in and automatically make decisions for you, it's really important to have a plan that says, here's who can step in and make decisions for me if I am incapacitated, because otherwise your family has to go to court, and they have to get a court-ordered conservatorship, which is always time-consuming, and it's always expensive. And sometimes decisions need to be made right away, and they can't wait days or weeks for your family to go to court. So very briefly, here's what you want to have in place. For medical decision-making, you want to have a healthcare proxy. That is the legal document in Massachusetts through which you give someone else the power to make medical decisions for you. If you're married, your spouse will probably serve as your primary agent, and you always want to have an alternate agent. You also want to have a HIPAA waiver or a HIPAA authorization, so the people who are making medical decisions for you can access all of your medical records that might otherwise be prevented from disclosure under HIPAA. And finally, you want to have a living will, which is guidance you leave to your decision makers about how you want them to make decisions around life-sustaining treatment. If you are in a persistent vegetative state, if you're unconscious, terminal, and there is no expectation that you will recover any meaningful quality of life, you want to leave instructions for your decision makers about whether or not you want to be kept alive artificially or not, so that they know what it is you would want. So that covers medical decision-making. On the other side, we've got legal and financial decision-making, and that's done through a durable power of attorney. Same idea as a healthcare proxy. If you're incapacitated, it would allow someone else to step in and make legal decisions for you, or sign legal documents, or access your financial accounts, or reallocate the investment mix in your 401k or IRA, or even do simple things like go to the post office and pick up your certified mail. Manage your social media accounts, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, all of the things that you're used to doing on a day-to-day basis for yourself. It would allow someone else to do those things for you. So that's a good plan for incapacity. By the way, if you've got adult children, your adult children, anyone 18 years of age or older should have a healthcare proxy or equivalent, a HIPAA authorization, and a durable power of attorney. So any kids going off to college should have those, so that if they get sick or injured, mom, dad, or someone else they choose can step in and get information and make decisions for them, and generally help them in a way they wouldn't automatically get to do otherwise. Okay, so we've talked about what a plan looks like for your young children. We talked about what a plan looks like for your assets, and we talked about what a plan looks like if you become incapacitated. So normally I can dive into that for at least an hour. I didn't have that hour tonight. If you want to talk further with someone on my team about planning, or whether we're might be a good fit for you, or really have any questions at all, what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop in a link into the chat to set up a 15-minute call with our client services coordinator. Her name is Lori Darling. Lori would be happy to chat with you and help you to figure out what you might need in terms of planning, to figure out whether we would be a good fit for you. And if not, let's help you to find somebody who would be a good fit for you. But really just to talk it through about what makes sense for you and what would be a good plan for you. So if you want to take advantage of that, we're dropping the link into the chat. You can click on that at any point, go into Lori's Calendly link and just set up an appointment there. And again, 15-minute call. You'll love chatting with Lori. She is awesome. And that's all I have. So again, if there were any questions that popped up as we went along, just drop them into the chat. And again, for me and for Mike, once we're all done tonight, we'll go back up through any chat questions and we'll get them answered. But now I want to turn it over to Mike Guthrie, again from Northwestern Mutual Life. And I'm going to let Mike take it from here.
Thanks, David. Appreciate it. Really good information there. Guys, like David said, my name is Mike Guthrie. I'm with Northwestern Mutual. I'm a financial advisor and work with clients of all stripes. But really what we aim to do is to build comprehensive financial plans for our clients, to give them confidence to make other decisions that come up. And what we've really found with most of our clients and with most people in general is that they are leading what we like to call kind of two financial lives. You've got the life that you're leading today, everyday stuff, planning vacations, paying your bills, saving for a home, and then the life you envision for yourself in the future. And what lies in between there are areas of resistance. And really what my job is, and my team's job is to help identify those areas of resistance and then help bridge the gap and align your actions with your intentions. So a lot of the things that we talk about, and while we're talking about different things, David and I overlap in terms of the need for and the, I guess, urgency of putting some sort of plan in place. Because if you're just winging it, right, it doesn't tend to work out so well. We are in the business of planning as opposed to hoping, right? We want to know what we're doing and putting us on the right track to do it. So what we try to do with our clients more than anything is help educate them on what a plan could look like, what makes the most sense. And then what I think is my most important job, or what any good financial planner's most important job, is to hold you accountable and provide some sort of backstop to keep you from making decisions that you might otherwise make, right? So holding our clients accountable to the plan that we put in place and making changes along the way, because what's important for a financial plan is that it's a living, breathing document. It's not etched in stone. And as things change for you in your life, your plan will change. And working with a planner, if you choose to do so, that's what I would argue would be the most important thing that you're looking for. Someone that's looking to grow with you over time and to help you change your plan as you see fit. But what I thought I'd do tonight, I'm going to share my screen with you guys and kind of walk you through what we would typically walk through. Oh, I'm going to clear that out. A little squiggly there. What we would walk our clients through in terms of education. And we'll certainly give you an idea as to what we're looking for, or what you might want to look for when you start your financial plan. And I apologize for my lack of drawing skills. I'm not an artist, but I'll do my best. So when we think of financial planning and when we're building our plan for the future, we really think of it as kind of like building a house. So like I said, I'm not a good drawer. So this is going to be my house, okay? So I apologize for the rudimentary part there. And we're going to build floors. So we've got a couple of floors here. And then down here, we're going to have 3 spaces, okay? So hopefully everyone's able to see this. But what we want to do is build this from the bottom up. And really the most important thing in this area down here in the box at the bottom is going to be safe, right? We want our assets to start off in a plan in the safe space, because those are the things that can start to build confidence towards a broader, again, financial plan that has the most chance for success. In box one, what we want to look for when we start to build our plan, and probably the first thing that you want to do, is to build up an emergency fund. And really what we're looking for in an emergency fund, rule of thumb, if we pull the book off a shelf and flip to the page on emergency fund and financial planning, you really should be looking to have 3 to 6 months of essential expenses covered in a savings account, separate, we would argue, from like any day-to-day checking account. So some sort of high yielding account, we could help you find them, or look for some of those out there that have a high yield, where you're building up enough assets to cover essential expenses should something happen to you. And I think what we found really, and you know, we keep harping on COVID, but I think what we found for sure is that in the age of COVID, anything can happen. You can lose your job, you can get furloughed, you can get sick. And we want to make sure that we at least have the ability that we don't need to start liquidating things to help pay for our essential expenses, like our mortgages, our car payments, food, electricity. So typically 3 to 6 months is a number that we're looking for. In this box, when we're talking here, what we look for is the proper amount of and type of insurance, right? So when we think of insurance and when we're covering for specific losses and what the things we try to cover for, it's a couple of things. The first is loss of income. So if you got sick, you got hurt, you got injured, and you couldn't work, do we have the right type of and enough of insurance to make sure that our lifestyle wouldn't have to change drastically? So we make sure that's in place first. Second, if something were to happen to us, the worst possible thing, we want to be able to cover our debts for the people that we leave behind. So think of things like mortgage, credit cards, student loans, if you still have some of those out there. Those are the things that we want to make sure that our insurance is covering, because we don't want to saddle our heirs, the people we love and left behind, with those things to take care of, because those don't go away, unfortunately, when we die. They're still there and they need to be taken care of. And then finally, we want to make sure if the unthinkable happens that we're covering for loss of life. But what we mean by that is we want to make sure that the people that we leave behind, if the unthinkable should happen, do not have to drastically change their lifestyle in order to continue to live. So imagine, you know, something should happen to you and your spouse and your children are left with a mortgage that they can no longer afford. So we want to cover that in some sort of insurance plan. If, you know, clearly loss of income for a spouse, particularly if you're the spouse who's making more money, we want to make sure that we're covering for at least 10 years worth of income. So for example, if you're making $100,000 worth of income, we want to look to cover at least $1 million, right? We want to have $1 million worth of insurance. And again, these can be you know, adjusted based on any number of needs, but when you're thinking about it, that's generally where we end up. Because what we don't want to have happen, like I mentioned before, is our loved ones to be left to make decisions that they wouldn't otherwise make in certainly a time of loss, right? So do we have to move? Do we have to sell the house? We'll be able to educate our kids. So there's a lot of things that we want to make sure that are covered with a proper insurance plan. And then finally, what we want to look at in our safe bucket is a forced savings. And forced savings can be a couple of things, but typically when I think about, you know, savings and forced savings, one thing that comes to mind that may not otherwise or sound intuitive is a home, right? So you're putting money towards your mortgage and your home every month. And I like to think of it more of a savings type of account than an investment, because all the things that go into it, you know, the home improvement, the insurance, the taxes, all the things that go along, you're paying your monthly mortgage, and then those things on top of that eventually starts to build into some sort of investment. But as you put your money away each month into your home, that's where we start to kind of think of that as kind of a forced savings account. The second thing that we think about is permanent life insurance. It's a concept very similar to the purchase of a home, where you're sending money each month in a premium payment to a life insurance company but it builds money over time and compounds over time. It can only go up and it can never go down. So that's why it stays in the safe bucket. Not typical or not necessary for every client that we have, but when we start to think of filling those spots in the safe area, permanent life insurance is a great way to do it. Okay. The next thing, next level up in our house that we're building here is our aggressive bucket. And when we think of aggressive and the things that we're looking to do, typically speaking, we're looking at things that are exposed to the market, right? Stocks, bonds, mutual funds, things along those lines, because we need to have money that's exposed to areas of the world that allow us to make more money than our typical savings account or things that are happening inside of the safe bucket, right? If you think of the stock market, it's a bit of a roller coaster ride of the market in general. You can go down, you can go up, but we want to make sure that we have exposure of our assets in the market, because typically speaking, that market return is going to be somewhere between 7 and 10% historically. So we want to make sure that we're allocating enough of our assets in a plan to assets that give us the opportunity to make more money than we would of things just sitting in the bank. Because over time, compounding time in the market at 7 to 10% per year starts to build up a very comfortable nest egg if you start early and you set up a systematic way to do it. Right. So monthly, we want to make sure that we're putting at least something away that includes retirement plans at work, 401ks, 403bs, 457s, those sort of things. IRAs certainly kind of fall into this area as well. And just traditional investment accounts can kind of fall into this bucket too. But we want to make sure that we have enough that we can ride that roller coaster over time. So when we do become financially independent, or if we go to retire, that bucket in the aggressive part of the house that we're building is full, or as full as we can get it to be. Okay. Because the next bucket up, and when we talk to some of our clients about this next one, it's the home run bucket. Oops, sorry. The home run bucket can be a number of things, right? It can be starting a business, right? It can be individual stocks. You're at a cocktail party and somebody says we should be buying Apple. It could be real estate, kind of investment real estate, not necessarily from a home, but it's those things that can give you the opportunity to really knock something out of the park, hence the home run. But like anything, a home run can be, striking out. So you go, right? If we think of the ability of a home run, right? It can be dramatically up, but it could also be dramatically down. So we want to make sure, and when we talk with our clients, the things that we really focus on when we're building a plan is not necessarily that home run bucket, although it is important, but the areas that we're going to focus on the most are the two levels in between. We want to make sure that safe bucket, or the safe level of the home, is as ironclad as we can get it. It's the foundation of the house. It's the most important part of planning, because it allows you to move into the aggressive bucket and invest money on a monthly basis, put it away over time, and allow that to compound. And what we're trying to do is build that solid foundation so that you've got the confidence to go for that home run potentially and take a little bit of risk with some of your money to help grow your plan over time. So figure this out. Stop sharing and come back in. So really what we're trying to do, again, for our clients is pretty straightforward. We want to help them build a plan that they're comfortable with, that doesn't kind of hamstring them in today's life, right? You don't want to have a plan that is so, that doesn't give you enough money to kind of live that life that you're living today, but also isn't so small that you're not able to build that kind of nest egg over time. But most importantly, like I mentioned before, what we're trying to do is to provide our clients with some level of accountability to build the plan, make sure we're doing what we say we're going to do, and give you a bit of a buffer to when you decide to make a decision that you might not want to make, right? So you call us, you call our team, you call a planner, whoever you're working with, and say, hey, I'm thinking about doing this. What do you think? If things are changed, if it's some outrageous idea, ultimately it's your decision. But what we want to do is say, hey, here's the plan we built. Here's what each dollar that we're spending every month goes to, and here's why. What has changed in that process? Has anything come up that we should know about that we don't want, that again, has really changed that plan altogether? So my team at Northwestern Mutual, and to touch on that a bit, we've got a large team. I work with a handful of people in our financial planning department that help us crunch numbers. As David mentioned before, and we'll put some information in the chat box as well. Please feel free to reach out and schedule an appointment with me, someone on our team. We can walk you through that kind of planning 101. We move on to planning 102 and then investment 101. So there's all sorts of classes that we can go through. There is no tuition bill though on those. I won't charge you for those. But we certainly can walk you through each one and provide you with a level of education around what we do, what we think is important, and then hopefully provide you that confidence, to build a plan and move forward with these different things. And again, like I said before, I think David and I are kind of cut from the same pizza pie in terms of our business. We want to provide you with a plan, because what we've found, the old kind of, cliche, tagline, if you will, failure to plan is planning to fail, right? So we want to make sure that you have something written down, concrete, that you can look at, that you can change when things change, but it ultimately puts you on a road to success, whether it's taking care of your family with estate planning, or if it's building a financial plan that helps you get where you want to go. We kind of are hand in glove in terms of these things. I know when David speaks to his clients, he brings up what I do. And I know when I talk to our clients, we get to a line, and the question that we're asking is, talk to me about your estate plan. Do you have a will? Do you have a durable power of attorney? Do you have a healthcare proxy? All those sorts of things. So, we're here to answer any questions. I think we're right up about that 20-minute time, David. So like we said, drop some questions in the chat box, and we'd be more than happy to answer them for you.
I gotta take myself off mute. Do you want to drop some contact information in the chat, or you want to let everybody know what's the best way that they can reach you?
Yeah, I'll put my information in the chat box right now. Just shoot an email. Give me the easiest thing really is to just give me a call on my cell phone. I'll put that number in there, but certainly send an email. I think from a follow-up standpoint, we'll send out my website as well that you can check out.
Awesome. So if anybody has any questions about anything that Mike has talked about, anything that I talked about, feel free to drop that in the chat. We'll wait a couple of minutes to see if anything bubbles up. I was scrolling through while Mike was presenting, and I didn't see anything. So either that means we did phenomenally well, or no one's paying attention. Calendly link. Calendly link for our client services coordinator is a little farther up in the chat. So we dropped that in there. Paula can post it again. And if for any reason anybody wants to reach out to our office, Paula can drop our phone number in there as well, 978-263-6900. But I'm not seeing any questions drop into the chat. So Joanna, is there a tool guide on how the trust is managed? Yes, there is. The way a trust gets set up is, number one, while you're still living, you're managing it for yourself. And generally speaking, if you're married and one of you dies, the survivor of you will very often continue to manage it for the benefit of the survivor of you. And it can be very simple at that point. It can be more complex at that point, depending on what goals you're trying to accomplish. Because that's where some of the estate tax savings can show up. But while you're alive, you're managing it for yourself. And then when something happens to you or to the survivor of you, if you're married, then a successor trustee steps in to manage it for the benefit of your other beneficiaries. Presumably it would be your kids if you still have young kids, and even if you have adult children, most often. And that trustee has powers to use the trust resources for the benefit of your children. and we'll have instructions that you will have created about what to do with all of those resources. There are guides that help trustees understand what that role is and what they need to do and what their responsibilities are. Yeah, there are some really good guides, and I've got two of them in my office right now that I very often share with prospective clients. So yeah, lots of resources for trustees about how to manage trust resources. And the one thing I would always point out to people is that a trustee does not exist on an island by themselves in managing a trust. Just like all of us can hire other professionals to guide us in the parts of our lives we are not expert in. We hire financial advisors like Mike to help us manage our investments and make plans around having a better life in the future. We hire tax advisors to help us with our taxes and tax strategy. We hire all kinds of people. Your trustee can hire those people as well. Trustees can hire financial advisors to help them make investment choices and decisions. And they can hire CPAs to help them with tax returns. And they can hire lawyers to help them figure out, hey, how do I go about administering this trust? So yeah, there are written resources and guides for trustees, but there are day-to-day resources that you take advantage of yourself. So those are all out there and available. And again, a trustee does not exist just as a lone wolf who's got to figure everything else out for themselves.
David, maybe I can just chime in there a little bit as well.
Sure.
To that. So, in our business as well, a lot of our clients have trusts set up with me, right, or with our team, that somebody like David set up for them from the legal standpoint. And then they would establish the account with us and then fund it, and then we could help manage those assets around financial planning and really tailor it to your specific needs. And then eventually, if there's something changes, there's also written language that you can put in there that this is how we want this managed going forward. So that's something that we definitely do quite a bit of.
And a question came up: can the trust have designated financial advisors? I've had clients who have really wanted to. They've got a long time family financial advisor that they would want a trustee to work with as well. What I always say to clients is, my recommendation is that you provide guidance but not commands, because lots of things can happen in the future that aren't anticipated that may make it inadvisable for a trustee to continue using a particular financial advisor. I like clients to leave wishes about how they want those resources managed. Are they risk takers? Are they not risk takers? Are they cautious investors or moderate investors? What's their kind of overall investor profile? And leave guidance about how they want the trust to be managed, to either preserve or to, for all kinds of reasons. But generally speaking, not to designate a specific financial advisor, because an individual advisor, sometimes things go sideways. And for an institutional advisor, because institutional advisors are sometimes very hard to dislodge. And when beneficiaries become disenchanted with professional advisors, it can be very hard to dislodge a institutional advisor. And a question has popped up: what is the general cost to set up a trust for a fairly simple estate or couple? Two answers, or two things I'd point out here. Number one, I'm generally leery of simple estate or simple anything. A lot of people walk through my door thinking, I just need a simple fill in the blank. I need a simple will, I need a simple something. And what I always say to prospective clients is, I don't know what you need. It may turn out to be that all you need is something very simple, or it may turn out that what you need is something more complex. But the only way to know that is to sit down and figure out what's most important to you. And so my goal in meeting with prospective clients is to, number one, help them get really, really clear about where they are right now. And then to help them get really, really clear about where they want to be instead. because not everybody who walks in the door is clear about where they are. And not everybody who walks in the door is clear about where they want to go. And those are the two most important things, because if you don't know where you are, it doesn't matter how good a map you have in your hand, you can't get to where you're going because you don't know where you're starting from. And it's equally important to know where you want to go. And then to figure out how do we get you from point A to point B? And that's where it's simple, because once we know where you are and where you want to go, for me, and I'm sure it's the same for Mike, it's pretty straightforward to guide you and to take you by the hand and walk you from where you are to where you want to be. That part's not hard. So I just want to be cautious about using the terminology simple as a framework right off the bat, because sometimes what people discover is where they want to go is not so simple. It seems simple in their mind. I want this to happen, but how to get you there is not as simple as you think. As to cost is a difficult thing to deal with in a webinar like this. And the reason why is because it depends. And I know that sounds like a very lawyerly answer. Lawyers like to say it depends, but it really does. It depends. It depends on what you need. It depends on what you want. It depends on how complex. It depends on what you're trying to achieve. Here's a good rule of thumb. And I've discovered this over the last couple of years. This was actually suggested to me by a client of mine. I had a client who, while we were going through our planning levels and the cost of our planning levels, said to me, you know, David, we feel like it would make a lot of sense that we spent at least as much on an estate plan as we spent on the swing set or the play structure that is in our backyard for our young kids. And I thought, well, isn't that interesting? And then we got to the end of our planning session and I said, well, how we do? And he said, you know what, we're right on. What the cost of what we're doing here is about the same as what we spent on our play structure. And so that might be a framework. How much would you spend on a play structure for your kids in your backyard? How much would you spend on a Disney vacation? Is it worth the same amount of money to create a rock solid plan for the lifetime of your family? The Disney vacation comes and goes in a week. The play structure, eventually they grow out of it and it just sits in the back of your yard and it doesn't get used anymore until you toss it in a dumpster like my wife and I did finally. But I think sometimes that's a good way to think about things. And I hate to say it depends. You know, our planning starts at a few $1,000s and it goes up from there. And some people think, wow, that's really expensive. And the answer is you can't do it well for less, because our team has figured out what it takes to build a really good estate plan, particularly for families with young kids. And our fees fairly reflect what it takes. And if you're paying less, it leads you to ask yourself, what is the other lawyer leaving out of my plan? Because they are indeed leaving something out. You cannot create a rock solid trust-based estate plan for $1,500. You just can't. So that, Kaylee, was a long answer to a short question, but I felt that was important to say. So I wanted to say.
Sorry, I hit the mute button back. If I can just piggyback on that a bit as well. I think sometimes, at least with the clients that I talk to, when I get to that part of the kind of fact finding, if you will, when I say, do you have an estate plan? Sometimes the answer is, I don't have an estate. You know, I've got my house and the kids. I mean, do I really have an estate? I think that's kind of a misnomer. You know, the simple, hey, I just have a house and some kids, I got to get a will in place. You know, the complexities can be a lot deeper than that, to David's point. So in order to get that kind of rock solid plan, you know, it kind of comes down to, okay, to make sure that everyone's taken care of, what's that worth? And David and his team certainly, you know what they're doing.
And a question just popped up. What if a couple create a joint trust and later divorce? That's pretty simple. Just like everything else in a divorce, things get divided and redistributed. And so a joint trust, ultimately, the assets in a joint trust come out of the trust, and it's very simple to take assets out of a trust, and they get distributed to each of the spouses. And then a joint trust usually gets terminated, and then each spouse often will go on to create their own individual trust and take the assets that they walked away from that marriage with and put them into their own individual trust. And then if they later remarry, they have the option to keep their own trust that benefits their own children, the children from the prior marriage, or to add an additional joint trust with a new spouse. And it's different for everybody, and it always depends on whether you're done having children or you're going to have more children with your new spouse. But yeah, it's very simple to dissolve a joint trust, distribute assets out of the trust back to the individuals in the couple, and then the individuals determine where they go from there in terms of estate planning. So good question. Any other questions about estate planning, about financial planning before we wrap up?
David, just real quick, I'm not sure that the Calendly link ever made it into the chat. I don't see it in there.
Your Calendly link, is that what we're talking about?
Your Calendly link.
I see my Calendly link into the chat in the chat. It is back up. It got dropped in 2 times in the chat at 8:31 and at 8:48. So if you're scrolling back up, I see it. Is there anyone who does not see the Calendly link dropped in there 2 times? Ooh, somebody still doesn't see it. Here's what we'll do. I am assuming we have everybody's email address from registrations. And if you don't see it, we'll make sure that we shoot that out to you via email. It may be the only reason I see it is because I am a host. And maybe that's why Paula sees it too. So I will make sure that we send that out to everybody so you have the Calendly link. All right. But we don't want you to not have that. That's important.
Ask if they just got the email I sent.
Let me just ask you one question. For everybody who's still on, do you see the note Paula just added to the chat? We'll be sure to include it in the replay email. No.
I don't see it.
Okay.
Well, are you sharing it with everyone? Where it says to everyone, or is it just to David?
Yeah. No, not waiting.
No.
Everyone, Paul. Okay. Paul's going to share it one more time. That may be the snafu that
Now I got it. I got to hear you go. There it is. There we
All
go.
Sorry about that. Fun with Zoom.
Yeah.
There's so many different places we can put things. It was getting shared to the waiting room inadvertently. Sorry about that. Okay, so it's there now. Great. We'll send it in the replay email anyway, along with everybody's contact information. So awesome. Thanks everybody for joining us. We both really appreciate it. And for myself, and I'm sure for Mike as well, I look forward to an ongoing conversation and continuing conversations with some of you, if not many of you, if not all of you on the call. And would be more than happy to have those ongoing conversations. And I'm sure Mike would be as well. So
absolutely. Thanks, David.
Thank you all for joining us, and we'll talk to you again somewhere down the road. Take care, everybody. Have a great night and have a great weekend. Bye-bye.